Melissa Norris here. You're listening to the Dragging Alaska podcast, where David Bays and I sit down with candidates running for governor, Senate, and House to talk about one issue: trawl fishing in Alaska. It's one of the most talked about topics in this year's elections, and our goal is simple: help Alaskans understand where each candidate stands and what they plan to do about it. Just a reminder, if you appreciate this effort by David and I interviewing candidates on trawl, be sure to comment on these episodes, review and share them. And please do tag Dragging Alaska whenever you share. Good day, everybody. David is out fishing for the summer, and I'm between trips. So I thought you might want to learn more about U.S. House of Representatives candidate Bill Hill. Bill is from Naknek. Well, Kokonak originally, but he has lived most of his life in Naknek. He's been commercial fishing in Bristol Bay since his youth, has ample experience in construction, and has followed the family calling as a teacher, principal, and superintendent around Alaska. Bill's an independent looking for a brighter future for Alaska's people and believes the best way to encourage hope is through action. Let's hear more about Bill's stance on government and what he wants to focus on in Congress, especially on the fisheries front. Welcome, U.S. House of Representatives candidate, Bill Hill.
Thank you so much for having me today. It's an absolute pleasure.
For us as well. We just want to get to know you a little bit, let Alaskans know who you are, what you stand for, and then we'll jump on the hot topic that's always at the forefront of my mind, I'm sure many others. So, Bill, tell us your connection with Alaska and how you grew up and all that good stuff.
I am through and through Alaska. I think, my experience reflects that of many others in our state. And hopefully I can be a good representative for Alaskans. I started out in a small village called Kokonak. We just had over 100 people in that place. And, we lived a real bush frontier upbringing. We didn't have TV or telephone or radio. We didn't even have electricity for a good part of the time when I was growing up. But man, we spent a lot of time outdoors hunting and fishing and trapping and picking berries, putting food on the table in that way. We washed clothes by hand. We had steam baths for getting clean, and we ran 40 yards to the outhouse, when we had to do our business. But it was a really good upbringing in a village of just about 100 people. There was just a lot of family time, a lot of work together as family, and just really enjoyable. I'm very fortunate to have lived that life. As a sophomore, we moved down to Naknek, which is in the Bristol Bay borough. It was over 1,000 people there. And I went from having a single classmate in Kokonak to having 12 in Naknek. And so it was like, for us, it was like moving to the big city, right? And so Naknek has, been my home base for most of my life, although I've had the opportunity to live in Fairbanks and Anchorage and Juneau for different parts of my life. But Naknek's been home base, and that's where I currently reside. It's home of the greatest sockeye salmon run in the world. Bristol Bay is, and man, that's just been a big part of my entire life. I can't remember when fish entered my life because subsistence fishing was a big part of our lives. And I started commercial fishing at the age of 8 on a set net site with my mom, my Aunt Gloria, and a couple brothers. And, we'd follow the tide out twice a day. And my mom and my aunt would pick the fish. And us young guys, our job was to carry the fish up the beach and stack them up for the cannery to come and pick up. And
Cool.
I did that till I was 12. And then my father said, "Bill, it's time for you to join me on the boat." And so at 12 years old, I became a drift fisherman in Bristol Bay. And that first night still sticks with me very clearly. I was, it was all by hand still, back then. We had to pull the nets in by hand. We didn't have a hydraulic reel or anything, but my dad and I pulled in the catch over the back deck, and then we picked everything and we put the fish in the brailers, and then we washed the deck down. And I asked my dad, I said, "How much did we catch, Dad?" And he said, "Oh, that looks like about 7,000 pounds. I said, "Wow, that's a pretty good catch." And I looked around the boat, everything was neat and clean. The fish were in their brailers. And I thought, this is the way to fish. I am never being a set netter again. So I have been a drift fisherman for the entirety of my life. And I've raised some of my children on the boat. 3 of my children joined me on the boat, and they learned how to work really hard, how to work beyond those self-perceived limitations a lot of people have. And how to work in Mother Nature, which is super rewarding some days, but some days she's really fickle and she just gives you a pounding. But, so I was very fortunate to have my children join me on the boat. But in addition to just commercial fishing, which I still do, I got out for a little bit this summer as well. I've been a construction worker, everything from laying sewer lines to building houses. I spent 25 years in the family profession, which is education. And I was a teacher, a principal, and a superintendent in communities large and small in our state. And finally, I'm a small business owner with my wife, Diane. We make brailers, commercial textile products for the fishing industry out in Naknek, trying to keep some of the money and some of the work in our hometown.
I love that.
Most importantly, the father of four and grandfather or chudda of
Mm.
seven going on eight. And that's a big part of the reason why I'm running is, I look at our state and I look at our nation and, I see some things I don't recognize as a place where I grew up, a place where I could work hard and build a good life. And I want that opportunity for all the children of Alaska. And I think that we see attacks on the rule of law and naked corruption in our nation, which is not the nation that we grew up in. And things need to change. And we need to make sure that we have people in Congress who truly reflect the Alaskan ideal and the Alaskan people and have the experiences that reflect who Alaskans are. And I don't think we have that right now. I think the decisions that are being made in Congress are along party lines. They don't necessarily think about Alaskans first. And so when I think about going to Congress, there's some real sort of three broad categories that I'd like my work to take place in. One, we've got to find a way to lower costs for Alaskans. And there's a lot of ways of tackling this, but reinstating the ACA premiums, which have impacted Alaskan lives. You talk about impacting Alaskans. Those Alaskans who've had their ACA premiums taken away, they're on average, they're seeing a $900 a month increase to their health insurance costs. And that is untenable. I know my family couldn't absorb that. So people are choosing between healthcare and housing, healthcare and food. We need to find a way to lower the cost of fuel. I mean, this war that's not even approved by Congress has just increased the cost of fuel so massively, especially in Bush, Alaska, where, my fuel bill last year for commercial fishing was about $14,000. I think I'm going to be well in excess of $20,000 this year. And for a small commercial fishing operation, that is a significant cost between making and breaking a season. You take a look at the cost of our food. I mean, a bag of frozen chicken that you can buy at Costco here in Anchorage for $12 or $15 is $80 in that. So we've got to do some work to tackle costs. Energy costs, some of those things can be tackled through an all of the above energy approach, meaning let's include renewable energies. And we can talk more about that later if you'd like to, but so we need to reduce the cost to Alaskans. We need to tackle corruption as a second priority. Congressmen should not be trading stocks while they're down there doing the work of the people. They should be focused on making sure that the lives of the American people, the Alaskan people, are better by their presence there. They should not be there fattening their portfolio. We need to tackle things like Citizens United. I'm endorsed by End Citizens United, and I'm committed to getting the dark money and the big money out of politics and out of our elections so that our voice, the Alaskan people's voice, the American people's voice, really counts in our election process. And third, let's protect this amazing way of life we have here in Alaska. I mean, we are so fortunate when we look around and we see the waters and the lands, the birds, the fish, the game that we get to enjoy just as a part of our life. Wow, so amazing. And, I fear when we have a government that's kind of, doing the things we see these days, that government overreach is going to impact our ability to enjoy that. It's going to impact our ability for me personally, as a subsistence hunter, my Second Amendment rights are really important. I went out in January and I got my mom a caribou because that's what's needed for meat for the winter. And then there's some things like a woman's right to choose. Government overreach should not infringe on women's healthcare decisions. We need to stay out of that. So broadly, those are three things that I really want to approach as a member of Congress, but I really want to approach it from the standpoint of I am an Alaskan. I've walked the pathways of many Alaskans. I've lived in the places of many of Alaskans, and I truly feel like I can represent us in a manner that is reflective of our values, our desires, our dreams, and our challenges too. So long and short, I'm Bill Hill and I'm running for Congress.
Well, Bill, that was a load and a tall order. And I have, utter respect for the effort and the goals. I couldn't agree more with all of those things need change. But man, my problem is how are you going to do that? How are you going to do that as an underdog? And, if corruption's the battle, obviously there's a plethora of it. How are you weeding through that to make change? And I've heard other candidates be like, we want to see the trading and I couldn't agree more, but aren't the people you're fighting against the people who stand to benefit? So how is that going to work?
I'm not focused on the people I'm fighting against. I'm focused
Yeah.
on the people I'm fighting for. And
Yeah.
regardless of that challenge, we need to take that on. as an individual, as a community, as a
Yeah,
state, and as a nation. We need to focus on making sure that our government is working for working people and we get it out of the hands of the oligarchs, the billionaires, and the corporations that are driving everything our government does. And, you know, it starts with one
it's
person.
true, Bill.
And you take a look at the state of Alaska, we are a great example for the rest of the nation. The fact that we have multi-partisan coalitions in our state government that are doing the work of the people, that is amazing. And I hope
Yeah.
that I can join like-minded people in Congress and build the coalitions necessary to serve the needs of the Alaskan people and the American people on a daily basis.
Okay, well that satisfies me as an answer because I had to ask it because I've heard that statement before, but there was not a how am I going to do this? It's a,
But
you know,
it's closely tied to another question I get all the time, which is, Bill, how do you keep? I guess the question goes, Bill, how do you keep hope alive? How are you
yeah,
hopeful?
that's a good question.
And that goes to taking action. The way that you keep hope alive is by taking action, whatever that action is. You have a podcast right now, and you started that podcast because there is something that you want to change. So you're
That's
taking
a
action,
fact.
and that's how you're keeping hope alive, right? And so for me, jumping in and trying to do something in this race where we need to make some changes. You keep hope alive by jumping in and doing things. It can be very small things like donating to the Bill Hill for Alaskan campaign or, jumping into the actual race or starting a podcast that talks about the trawl issues or
Yeah.
donating to your local community donation center or helping out at the school. There's a lot of ways to keep hope alive.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's where I find hope is through action.
Okay. Well, you introduced the subject, so let's get to it. We can go back on some of these other topics that are important to you because as an Alaskan resident in Eagle River, I'm looking, who am I voting for? I want to know all of it. So, but I am, as 25 years of the publisher of Fish Alaska magazine, I'm heavily invested in this trawling issue. I've seen a drastic amount of change since the time that I started my business, and I
Mhm.
represent sport fishermen of Alaska and I represent the tourists that come here to experience it too, which is a major economic factor to this state, just like commercial fishing. And I want to be very clear with you that, you know, myself personally and my team, we respect Alaskans trying to make a living. We respect commercial fishing. There's plenty of room for that. What we don't like is where some user groups are just restricted so saying that it's being infringed upon. So that's my stance. Why don't you tell me how you feel about all of it?
I'm right there with you, and it just kind of goes to sort of this corporatocracy that we've developed in America where corporations get special treatment while the rest of us have to live
Yeah.
by these rules that infringe on our lives every day. We're expected to follow a different set of rules in corporations, and they're by and large are let go scot free. I have spent a life, I mean, the cycle of my life as a young person was all about fish. It was every day was about fish. We'd start out early in the spring and we'd set the net out in front of our home in Kokkinok and we'd just be so grateful for the first, salmon that would show up. And there was one spring where two king salmon were the first salmon in our net. And that was really remarkable. And we shared it with our families and our friends and things there. So then we'd do a lot of fishing in the spring just to kind of get some food and things. And then we'd load up the boat and we'd head down the Iliamna Lake and down the Kwijak to Naknek and we'd commercial fish in the summer. And so we'd spend all summer commercial fishing so we could have money for the winter. And at the end of commercial fishing season, we'd load the boat back up and head back up the Kwijak across the Iliamna Lake and go home. And we'd really start fishing then because we always had 50 some odd dogs because my parents had dog teams. And
Mm.
and so not only were we putting up fish for ourselves in the winter, but we were putting up thousands of fish for our dogs as well. And man, that was just a Herculean effort. But then in the winter, in addition to the food that we'd caught for ourselves and our dogs, we'd be out there on the ice with this little can of bait. Salted salmon eggs were the best bait for catching trout. And so we'd be fishing through the ice in the winter, catching trout, in the fall too. I mean, we'd right before freeze up, we'd go up to Gibraltar Lake and we'd seine redfish, spawned out, we'd call them redfish, spawned out salmon because it was a special treat for us. We'd fillet them and we'd hang them out to air dry, essentially freeze dry. And that was a special treat for us. And then, the cycle would start all over again in the spring. So it was just year round fishing for us, a lot
Mm.
of different methods, but really centered around sockeye salmon.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a complete way of
So
life.
with that, yes, subsistence has got to be a priority.
Absolutely.
for any resource in the state. Subsistence has to be a priority because it's a very real part of survival for communities in bush Alaska. But we have so many user groups that all want access to a
Yeah.
resource, right? And you talked about sports fishing, which really makes sure that a lot of people have jobs in this state. Really has a
Yes.
lot of small business tied to it. Talk about commercial fisheries like mine, which thousands of small businesses thrive in the summer in Bristol Bay because of the sockeye salmon return. And then you talk about the industrial grade trawling that happens and the impact it has on all those user groups. And I don't think that they should be held unaccountable for what's happening. And so, yes, I'm very interested in finding solutions that keep the use of the resources equitable and make sure that the Alaskan people's usage of those resources is prioritized.
So, have you been affected by the trawl industry out where you are?
I think the only thing that we would say directly might be an indicator is we really don't have much of a king salmon return any longer. So the Chinook return has been relatively weak. And as a young person, I know that my parents went out and commercially fished for king salmon. So there used to be a pretty robust run of kings in our neck of the woods. But nowadays, we're having our fishing opportunities for sockeye reduced to try to protect the king salmon runs. So that's the only real indicator right now that there may be an impact from trawling, but I don't know that there's a direct link that's been identified, other than it's
I
the
see.
same as some other river systems.
So, when you talk about preserving our fisheries and making strides federally for that, and you want to keep it locally, Alaska managed, I would presume is
hmm
part of your
hmm
perspective. You want to tell me more about some of your fisheries management ideals?
Well, I mean, you look to our neighbors up north here that, are just, I talk to people in, you know, different communities that rely on the Yukon Kuskokwim runs returned. The returns from those runs to, not only provide the food, but are such an important part of their culture. It's such an important tradition that they pass on to the young. If they don't have a significant seat at the table when decisions are being made about that resource, then we're on the wrong path. The fact that we have management systems that prioritize people who are vested in the industries
Yeah,
that are supposed to be controlled by that board, that's wrong. Let's make sure we
right.
have seats at the table for all Alaskan user groups and make sure that tribal representation and subsistence users are at the top of that list.
So, what is the mechanism for that? Would that be through legislation? How would that work?
Well, I think I've talked to some people about, okay, so Magnuson Stevens, that is such a massive piece of legislation that doing any sort of reauthorization of that whole thing would be a very, very difficult lift. But finding ways to make sure that we can make some amendments to that bill, which would allow for greater representation or regulate the kind of representation that's at the table. Right now, with the way that it works, Alaska's governor has a say, which kind of can skew the representation depending on the governor's leaning. So making sure that amendments target the type of representation that need to have a seat at that table, I think would be a good start.
Yes, I think that's a smart way to look at that as well. So, oh gosh, you might hate this question. Do you have a particular candidate in the other races going on that you lean towards for this reason of fisheries management? You can
Jeez.
say, yeah, you can. Have you decided who you're voting for yet for our governor and for our Senate? That's a tough question, right? You don't have to necessarily
No.
out yourself, but I want to know.
No, I think more globally, all of my decisions that I make, and I've been a lifelong independent, just to put that out. This is
Yeah.
not something that I've done to run this race. I mean, from the moment that I registered to vote, I've been an independent. So, every race, I've looked at the candidates presented to me. I've looked at the policies that were at stake, and I've made the decision based on what's best for my family, what's best for my community, what's best for my region, what's best for my state, and what's best for my nation. And so when I go to the polls, those are the things I keep in mind, and it has nothing to do with whether they're a Democrat or a Republican, because I voted all across the political spectrum
Yes.
in my life. And that's the way I'll approach this year as well, is when the time comes to vote, who is going to be the best representative for Alaskans? Who's going to protect the resources I care about? And who's willing to stick their neck out and make decisions for the Alaskan people, regardless of the personal political risk that they expose themselves to. Those are
Mm,
the kind of people I can get behind.
yeah, I'm afraid those. It's tough to weed through and find those folks a little bit here and there.
So long story short, maybe I won't say exactly who I'm voting for, but yeah, they need to be Alaskan through and through, care about Alaskan issues, and be willing to go to bat for Alaskans regardless of the risk they expose themselves to.
Yeah, maybe you'll tell me after I stop recording. I'm still trying to figure out my plan here, Bill. And a lot of people want to know, right? As a strong non trawl advocate, because I recognize that there's livelihoods and people's finances at stake. I get all of that, but just can't wrap my head around serving a few wealthy elitists for their gain while all these thousands and thousands and thousands of people are. I mean, my livelihood depends on the success of fishing in this state.
Mhm.
If we can't do it, there's nothing to write about.
Well, and two, you look at, okay, so we should be using the resources of Alaska, regardless of its mineral, gas, oil, or wildlife or fish. We need to be using those in the best interest of Alaskans,
Yeah.
right? And when you talk about things like the industrial trawling industry that happens in the Bering Sea, primarily chasing things like pollock, most of that money, and not just most by a small percentage, but I think it's over 80% of the money that's generated from that industry leaves the state. And I think I've seen some stats that say that about 90% of the jobs in that industry are served by people from out of state.
Yes, that's
And
true too.
to me that says, okay, maybe this is an industry that's really not serving Alaskans well. But I do get that our neighbors in Unalaska and Kodiak do see a benefit from it. I do get that CDQ groups get some benefit from it. Bristol Bay Economic Development Corporation is a CDQ group in my region, and it was really important for some of the programs that I built in our region. As a school superintendent, I helped build a Bristol Bay Regional Career and Tech Ed program with the other three school districts in the region. And we built some other programs as well, but that would not have happened without BBEDC's support. So those are very important things in the region. And so, as we're making decisions about the trawl industry and moving forward, we have to keep some of those things in mind because the Unalaskas and the Kodiaks that do get some funding for their communities through through this industry, and the CDQ groups that get funding through this industry, they're going to be impacted by the decisions we make. So we need to make sure that they're kept in mind as well as all the other user groups as we're moving forward.
Well, frankly, I mean, there's money to go around on a federal level for the fisheries emergency situation for other gear types. So that money could go towards these CDQ groups that are going to suffer. I mean, there's an answer for everything, right? When
Yeah.
if there's abundance in our state, we'll be able to take care of the small communities that need it.
Yeah. And, I am not dead set against every form of trawling. I'm more, it's like the industrial trawling and that, sort of, well, they call it midwater trawling, but it impacts the seafloor, the environment, you know, such a significant, up to 80% of the time is what I've heard. That's not a long term industry that can be supported because you're going to decimate the very resource that you're trying to keep. And you're going to decimate things like crab. You're going to decimate things like halibut. You're going to decimate the salmon runs. And we've already seen that in a time when, salmon runs are so low. Yeah, we can point fingers at a lot of things,
Yes.
acidity, global warming, turbidity in the water. But we do know that there's one thing we can impact, and that's the bycatch rates. And I would say that in a time when the returns are low, that bycatch is even more important because those fish that are returning to the streams are the ones that have shown that they're robust in the face of the climate changes. And we need to make sure they're going back to spawn so that they are producing the next generation of fish that are going to be strong enough to withstand these climate changes that we're seeing. So I don't know. I think there's a lot wrapped up in this, but we need to be protective of all user groups. And we need to be doing things in a real thoughtful manner.
So when you say protect all user groups, you still want to preserve some sense of trawling in the state is your point of view?
I think the smaller scale in-state trawls, the mom and pop sort of single individual user, I think those are things that may be able to control their bycatch to a greater degree than nets that are the size of multiple football fields and, factory vessels that are, hundreds of feet long. I think that the mom and pop fisheries, we need to make sure that we find ways for them to exist. And I thoroughly think that when there are challenges that are presented to industry, they find a way, right? Right now, the most efficient way to harvest that resource is through the system that they've developed. And that's what it's all about. It's about
Right.
efficiency. The largest vessel you can have, the largest net you can have, the fewest people working on deck you can have, the smallest number of taxes you pay. It's all about efficiency, but often when industry is forced to change the way they do things, they find a way. And I think that we can start with the smaller in-state harvesters, and they can find a way to move us forward in some of these things.
I mean, I respect that idea. There's a large portion of Alaskans at this point who are fed up with how things have been managed,
Hmm.
how this has gone on for decades, and even previous to the Magnuson-Stevens Act, how it's gone on for decades before that, right? Without real any caps of anything. And how honest has the reporting been over the decades? All of this leaves such a bad taste in Alaskans' mouth. There is an overwhelming amount of people that are just like, no, ban it. We want it all gone. So,
Yeah.
like, one of the questions that David and I have been asking candidates through all the episodes is whatever you do, if the people speak and they want to ban, are you going to stand behind that and, stick up for that? So
Well, I think
it's a tough position to be in.
right. No, I get that completely. And I too have a bad taste in my mouth from everything that's happened. But I think with any decision that we make in Alaska, the opportunity to amend our ways has to be presented. So very firm, very low bycatch limits is the start. And if we can't find a way forward, then yeah, let's talk about a complete ban. But it's tough to transition an industry and communities who base their
Yeah.
income off that industry at a moment's notice. So when we talk about Unalaska
Yeah.
and Kodiak and some other communities, we need to make sure that those impacts are realized as we're moving forward with this idea.
I respect that. I would also say that some people feel like, holy smokes, look at these king returns. Look at the Karluk, look at the
Yeah.
Ayakulik. And do we care about kings enough to save them? Well, I know us sporties do. Like, it's not a high prized, commercial. Well, it would be a high prized commercial fish. Let me reverse that. But it certainly is also highly important to many communities for subsistence. And so we need to save kings. Like, don't we need to save kings if we can save kings? And so if we wait and we let these things develop, exponentially taking 40,000 kings out, I don't care where they're going, they're suffering all
Hmm.
over.
Hmm.
There aren't,
Yeah.
they might be bouncing back in certain systems here and there.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm not a fan of letting this continue in that mode at all. No, I'm not talking about more decades of, oh, we're going to do some more research. We need to start taking action. Let's lower those limits. And if those limits are exceeded, let's shut them down. I mean, that's kind of the attitude we have to have in this whole process. So,
Yeah.
no, I'm not talking about more and more decades of
Yeah.
research because that's not done us any good.
Yeah. And I'm struggling with the fact that I don't think you can pop in there and have the US Secretary of Commerce be like, okay, I support this. Let's do it. So
Yeah.
that's been my struggle from the get go is I'm like, how is anyone convincing them to make that change?
Yeah. And, I've traveled around the state this year. I mean, one of the really great things about doing this work is being able to travel across Alaska and talk to Alaskans, from Fort Yukon and Fairbanks to Kotzebue and Bethel, and really hearing the people and the pain that they're feeling on the ground with the loss of the fishery, with the loss of their culture, with the loss of the practices that they passed down from generation to generation. The part of a core identity of people for thousands of years that's being lost. Yeah, I feel
Yeah.
that. I
Yeah,
mean,
you
that
do.
is something that needs to be taken as a priority by everybody in this state. Growing up in Kokkinok, there were only two vehicles in the village. My parents had a truck, and then the school also had a truck. So pretty much everything was walking. Everybody walked. And in the spring, you'd see people leaving the village of Kokkinok, and they'd be packing all of their needs, their bedding, their cookware, food and things on their backs. And the whole village would walk past our house on their way down to fish camp, which I believe was 5 to 8 miles away, something like that. And so they would leave the main village and they would spend the entire summer at fish camp putting up fish
Hmm.
for the winter. And that was just a core part of the identity of the people in that village, and in the fall, they would pack up their fish, they'd pack up all their belongings, and they'd head back up to the main village where they spent the winter. And so you think about these communities that have just lost this core part of their being, and it's just heartbreaking. We need people willing to do things about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of the chords that strikes us all the most is seeing folks that have their culture and their way of life and survival, as you have said, with food sources.
Yeah.
And as this food source is under demise, then also we're seeing skyrocketed goods out of control.
Yeah.
And together it's not going to be good. Like the long term, the mental health, the physical health, none of that is going to be good.
Well, I mean,
So,
bottom line, a lot of people are being forced out of the communities that they love and they want to stay in. You talked
yeah.
about fuel and some of the communities surrounding mine this winter, heating fuel is projected to be over $15 a gallon.
How long's a
And
gallon of heating fuel heat your house?
I think the boiler I have has I want to say it's a 1.8 gallon an hour nozzle on it. So probably we probably burn 300 gallons every 5 weeks. And it's a really efficient boiler too. So 5 or 6 weeks. So, that's a lot of money. I mean, people are going to have to make a choice of staying in the communities they love and moving because there's just, you can't live in a house that's, 20, 30 degrees below zero. It's just
Wow.
not tenable. Yeah.
What else is on your mind as far as fisheries go, Bill?
I think, just first off, just the joy and gratitude of being in a state where this is a part of our life, having the opportunity over the course of my life to be involved in something that is a seasonal and cyclical thing that, you share with family and you share with community and, the joy of the first fish showing up in the summer and so there's a lot about Alaska's fisheries that we all feel. And I think Alaskans in particular are so tied, whether you're dip netting in the Kenai or you're casting a fly for sheefish or, in my neck of the woods, putting out a subsistence net for as short a time as possible so you don't overload it with sockeye. I mean, we are all so connected by fish, and it's such an important thing in our state. And it's so very complicated when you look at the user groups, subsistence, sports fishing, multiple types of commercial fishing. We have international issues surrounding our fisheries. We have national issues surrounding our fisheries. We have trans-border waters. And, we've got such a complicated thing. And it's so important that, fisheries needs to be at the top of the mind of the people in Congress every single day. It's not a seasonal thing. It's not an election thing. It's something you need to focus on every single day when you're in Congress. And that's something that I would commit to doing.
Yeah, and I would do you think that the other members of Congress are focused on this issue? Or are they just kind of like, well, it's Alaskan. I mean, we have such a small representation, and what percentage of US fish come from Alaska? Well, most of it. So, do they even view it as a federal issue until it's an economic issue?
Well, I don't really know them personally, so I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but maybe in the next year or so. I can tell you though that, fishing is a part of my life. I had to take a break from the campaign trail here to go fishing. So I spent 10 or 12 days out in Bristol Bay making sure that, I paid the bills for this winter. And I have a brother and a son-in-law who are running my boat right now because I had to get back to doing this work. But,
Yeah.
we need people in Congress who really prioritize fishing on a daily basis. And I think that I can do that for Alaskans. And I know it's a complicated issue. And I know we are not all going to agree on every point, but it needs to be a priority. And it can't just be something that pops up. It's election season. So now we see all these things popping up,
Yeah.
that are addressing fisheries because, August 18th is pretty close and November's pretty close. So let's make sure we Alaskans know that we're working on fisheries. But, it needs to be work that's done every day. And we need to consult Alaskans every day on not just commercial fishing, but commercial fishing, subsistence fishing, sports fishing, all the aspects of fishing that we need. Escapement, especially. Let's protect these fisheries.
So you're coming from my sport fishing audience would want me to ask you. So this is certainly not to be antagonistic, but you have a commercial and you have a subsistence background. Does that mean sport is the least important from your perspective? Because mind you, I'm a year-round Alaskan, a pescatarian who only eats fish. I do not eat anything trawl caught as a stance. And so I'm very
Uh,
limited. And for me, it's harvest. It's not just I'm playing with my food. It's so fun. It is fun.
right, right.
It's fun to be out on the water. I fish all the ways that I can. Tomorrow I leave for Kodiak. I have
Yeah.
5 days in Larsen Bay, so I'm excited about
Oh,
that. But
very
but
nice.
and I'm gonna catch them on rod and reel, and then I'm gonna eat 'em. And I use every bit. I have meter down exactly what I'm gonna use. I have a sense of exactly how much I need to feed my family, and I don't take any more than I need. So
Well, once you share your recipe for baked king heads, then I'll then I'll know we speak
oh,
the same
cool.
language. Oh, you would be amazed.
I love seafood and fish.
Best part, but
I mean, we eat the cheeks, so I can imagine it would be. Yeah.
yeah. No, I think sports fishing plays a very important part in Alaskan lives. I mean, one of my best friends, the guy who my youngest son is named after, he was all about sports fishing and guiding and, taking part in that industry. When I grew up, we didn't have rods or anything. We just had fishing line with
Yeah.
a hook on the end, and we put a big gob of bait on it, and then we'd just spin it and throw it out, and then we'd pull it back in like this. And so that was our fishing equipment, but we still did it almost every single day. And then we'd Manuck in the winter, ice fish in the winter. We'd ice fish, and there's a great deal of joy out of catching them one by one. I get it, but
Yeah.
mostly
Yeah.
I catch them multiple at a time.
Yeah. Bragging. I can do that with a lingcod who attacks another.
One of my buddies in Klawock took me out on a fishing trip 3 years ago. I think it was 3 years ago. And he took me out to the outer coast, and I had never seen that before. We were out fishing, I think it was black bass or something like lingcod, man. They are aggressive,
Oh, you
hungry
got to see
creatures.
that. Yeah.
Watching them eat each other on the way up, that was crazy.
We've seen lingcod cannibalize lingcod. I mean, they are just
Yeah.
ruthless. Yeah. And we run
Yeah.
underwater cameras, so we get to see some
Oh,
pretty cool
yeah.
things.
That would
Yeah,
be
it's
cool to
fun.
see.
It is fun. Yeah. So thank you, Bill. This has been really enjoyable. I like what you stand for. I think it's an uphill battle for anyone who's trying to not go with the status quo, but I think this country could use that right now.
You know, More than about 60% of Alaskans do not identify with either the Democratic or the Republican Party. And even the Alaskans that do, I was speaking to a young lady this past weekend out at the Bear Paw Parade, and she was telling me that she was a young Republican and that she was doing a lot of work. But she said, but we're not like those lower 48 Republicans that fit into this neat little box, because I believe some things over here that don't necessarily
Yeah.
follow the party line. So I think it's pretty Alaskan to be independent in nature. And so I think we need some representation along that line. And so I'm here to do that work.
Well, Bill, one question that David and I always ask our visiting guests here, candidates running for office: will you, how do you stand on accepting any funds for your campaign from trawl interest groups, trawl corporations, etc.?
No, we are not taking any trawl money. We're not taking any PAC money. Our campaign is based on representing the Alaskan people and nobody else. And so we're going to continue working to get individual donations from as many places as we can. But yeah, we are not taking trawl money, and we're not taking any corporate PAC.
Excellent. And you do have some business organizations that are supporting you.
We are the only campaign endorsed by organized labor. There are 15 unions, 15 plus unions that have endorsed our campaign. And so they have provided some funding for our campaign. But beyond that, yeah, no corporate PAC.
You're out in Naknek. Do we have any fun mutual friends out there?
Do you know Nancy Moore?
Yes, I just got to give her a hug. We just fished the Alagnak a couple weeks ago.
Nancy is such a great example of how the sports fishing industry can truly and positively impact the communities they
absolutely.
live in. She raised her daughter in our community. Her and her husband were coaching, and they were reffing, and they're always giving
Yeah.
back to the community. And they're such great people. Yeah, and early supporters of my campaign.
Yes, excellent. Yeah, their whole family, wonderful, wonderful people, and now they've bought the Branch River Air, and so they're just like in the fabric of it all. I got to give Nancy a quick hug. She happened to pop in at the air service as Marcus and I were coming back from that trip on the Alagnak, so it was really nice to see her.
And it's tough to get any time with grandma anymore, is it?
Oh,
Now
well,
that she's a
she
grandma.
has her priorities.
Patricia Adele. Do you know Patricia Adele?
No, Patricia as well. Yep, I've worked with her years ago, and she's also a lovely human being. So that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Yes, and she's a year-round Alaskan out there.
Yeah, she actually worked in our school for a bit, and she,
that's
only is she an amazing guide and fisherman and host, but wow, what a great teacher! The students sure responded to her well. She's just another amazing person.
I believe that. Yeah.
We're so connected in Alaska.
We are so connected in Alaska, and I'm here in Eagle River, where you just came through for Bear Paw, but I also get to travel around the state as part of my gig. And 25 years at this, owning this fishing magazine, has been a real joy, and gotten to see a lot of cool communities. I know where, it's been a joy. So yeah, raising my daughter
What a great
here
life.
too. What a great life.
What a great life.
We are privileged and we know it and we respect it. And it truly is all about preservation of that life and preservation of the
Hmm.
resource. And, I would say that the fishermen, sport fishermen, small boat, commercial fishermen, subsistence fishermen, nobody wants conservation more than the folks who need the resource to thrive. We want it for future
Yeah.
generations. We don't want to take it all today.
No, we don't. I mean, you look at the self-imposed shutdown on the Yukon-Kuskokwim to protect their fisheries. I mean, if that doesn't speak more loudly than anything else, I mean, that's just a true example of trying to protect this resource for the generations to come.
I hear from lodge owners in Bristol Bay, some of them are thinking about, can we do this as catch and release only? And, some people have
Hmm.
thoughts on that. Well, you're not going to save them all. Well, kings actually have the hardiest mortality rate. So can it still exist and people can still go experience it because it is absolutely riveting?
Hmm.
Yeah, they can, but preserving those hens and preserving,
Yeah,
their ability to spawn is crucial. So, got to get them there first, though, Bill. If they can't get through,
that's right. We've
yeah,
got to.
we've got
We got
to.
to make sure that they're protected.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want Alaska's sport fishing audience to hear from you, Bill?
Just, I'm an advocate for all user groups. I'm an advocate for the resource itself. And I'm an advocate for making really wise decisions that make sure that Alaskans maintain access to this resource and that those friends of ours from around the nation and the world who would like to come and experience it, we'd like them to have the opportunity to access it as well. And, I hope to serve Alaskans and I will hope to wake up every day thinking about Alaskan lives and going to bed thinking about how to make Alaskan lives better. And I will be a continual and never ending advocate for fishing and fish policy in Alaska as a part of the work I do.
Wonderful. Well, it's been really an honor to meet you. I wish you so much success. And man, got a battle ahead.
Melissa, it's good work though, right? It's the right
It
battle. So
is.
we're going to
It is.
we're going to continue fighting and man, it's just been a true joy to meet you and to spend some time with you and thanks for the work you do on behalf of Alaskan fisheries and Alaska and the fish.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate it.
Well, that wraps up this episode of Dragging Alaska. We created this podcast as a public service effort to help keep our fisheries and resource conversations front and center. If you found value in today's episode, please follow the podcast, leave a review, and share it with others who care about Alaska's future. Your comments, feedback, and support help us continue these conversations and reach many more people across the state. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on Dragging Alaska.